It's Lucy Litch, and this is Tiny House Conversations. It's the Australian-based podcast where I interview experienced tiny houses, tiny builders, and adventurers in the tiny world so you can discover how to create, build, and transition into tiny life. Before we get into the show, I want to know something. Are you a tiny houser, and would you like to share your tiny house story and experiences on the podcast? Or are you a business that has a product or service that aligns with the tiny house movement and would be beneficial for the tiny house community that you'd also like to share on the podcast? If so, I'd love to hear from you, and you can head over to tinyhouseconversations.com, and on there you'll see a section that says share your story. If you fill out your details there, I'll get back to you very soon. Now, here's the intro. Hey, it's Lucy here with another episode of Tiny House Conversations. So you want to go off the grid in your tiny home, and you might be wondering, what kind of system setup and equipment do I need? How much will it cost? And where do I start? And today I'm speaking with Matt Porter, who is a standalone power system designer, installer, battery tech, and self-proclaimed wise guy from SAE Group. SAE stands for Solar, Aircon, and Electrical. And I was first introduced to Matt by my past guests from episode number 9 and number 14, Matt and Kathy McMillan, who are tiny houses from the mid-north coast of New South Wales and had nothing but good things to say about SAE Group and Matt. And in this conversation, we talk about where to start when it comes to an off-the-grid solar system that suits your needs and wants, the basics of how a solar system works and the equipment involved. We also talked about the important considerations and what to look for or ask about when finding a solar company to work with, roof solar panels versus panels on trailers, sheds, or racks, an intro to grid-connected solar, and lots more. Now, I know that solar systems can be quite complex, and it can even sound like speaking a different language. And so Matt helps to break things down for us today to help you know where to start with your off-the-grid solar system for your tiny house. Now, on to the show with Matt. Hey, Matt, welcome to Tiny House Conversations, and thank you so much for joining me here today.
No worries at all. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. So, Matt, before we dive into all about off-the-grid solar systems for tiny houses, I'd love to start by getting to know a little bit about you and your story, and how you became interested in solar energy and, as you say, helping people achieve energy independence. And then can you share a little bit more as well about what you do for SAE Group?
Yeah, well, my journey probably started in 2012. My wife and I moved back from Canada, and I just really didn't want to go back into my previous line of work. So I started looking for different opportunities. An opportunity came up with a local battery manufacturer, a supplier of caravan products. So I took that up, and then probably just developed from there. It was started out humble beginnings, I guess. Started out with caravans, 12-volt systems, camping systems. And then an opportunity arose within the company to move into more off-grid sort of systems. So I took that, and then, just learned everything I could. Got my CC accreditation for off-grid installations and designing systems. I had some really good guys that I worked with as well that, really knew their stuff and sort of put me on the straight and narrow at the beginning. So I had that foundation there. Yeah, fast forward to today with SAE Group. Been here 4 years now, and just been heading up the off-grid department and batteries, and just really immersing myself in off-grid and anything batteries, really.
Amazing. Are you finding that the interest in off-grid facilities has been growing over the years, just in a general sense, whether it's tiny homes or regular homes as well, and even just commercial businesses?
Yeah, battery storage is definitely on the up. I think off-grid's always been there in the background sort of thing. It's really been a niche sort of thing for people, but think with everything that's going on, it's coming to the forefront a bit more. There's always been, properties or situations where people have needed off-grid, in particular, like if it's a large property and there's a great distance from the house site to the mains power, off-grid's a viable option for that. Tiny homes has really been increasing a lot over probably the last 4 or 5 years. Definitely on the up for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's this move towards more self-sufficiency, and as you also mentioned previously, like energy independence too. So I think that's great. And I'd love to dive a little bit more into off-grid solar for tiny homes, and wondering, if someone is wanting to start out on their journey, exploring off-grid for their own tiny home, how can they work out what they actually need and what type of system would be best for them, as well as thinking about things like location and sunlight hours and all of that?
Excellent question, Lucy. So podcasts like this are a good place for information. You can actually listen to what people have already done and what's worked for them. Plan it out, get an idea of what you want to do. You may not necessarily need a huge system. Like most vans only have a panel or two and a charge control and battery and run all DC appliances and lights. Tiny homes might use a combination of AC power and DC power. So the best place to start is an appliance list. Work out what you need and what you want. Do you need an aircon or fans do the trick? Do you want an electric cooktop or gas be okay? Same with your hot water. There may not be space for rooftop solar hot water system, so you might need to use a small cylinder or even instantaneous gas hot water. What will you need for your water and sewage? Are you on town supply, or will you need to have pumps and aerators? If you're going to use some DC power, that's totally fine. We still work out power consumption the same way, and it's just that your installer will need to know so that they can plan out the components. So first thing, write your appliance list out. What are you going to have? Fridge, lights, TV, microwave, laptops, phones. You might have a hair straightener or a hairdryer that you want in there. Whatever it is, write it down. And then you need to get your power ratings. So most appliances will have a compliance stamp or a sticker. You could even purchase a simple watt meter. There's a little device that plugs into your power socket, and then your appliance plugs into it. It's got a little LCD screen on there, and it'll tell you exactly what that appliance is using at that time. You find them online. They're pretty cheap, like $20 or $30. So, if you haven't purchased the appliance yet, then you just need to check with your supplier or just Google it. Most appliances will actually have the energy rating or the tech specs on the listing. We can also link an example load sheet for people to take a look at to see what we're talking about. Next step would be establishing run times. So when we do our calculations, we use hour ratings, so watt hours or kilowatt hours, power over time. So for example, a kettle. So a kettle might be rated at 2,500 watts, which is pretty big, but it only runs for 3 or 5 minutes at a time and only probably a couple of times a day. So what we need to do is average that out over an hour rating. So, daily consumption was probably only a couple hundred watts. The other thing is fridges and air conditioners will have a duty cycle, which is like, part of the time it's on, part of the time it's off. Fridges will usually have like a 30% duty cycle generally. So over the course of the day, say your fridge is rated at 150 watts, even though it's plugged in 24/7, it's only going to run for 30% of the time. So we'll use 8 hours for that run time. So 8 times 150 is 1,200 watts. You can also look at the energy efficiency rating stickers, the little stickers with the stars. There will be a number under the stars with a kWh next to it. That's its average usage over a year. So you would just take that number, divide it by 365, and you'd get your average daily usage. Also, note down what time of day you use your appliances. That's important in our calculations that we do as designers. So we want to know what you're using in the daylight hours and what you're using in the nighttime hours, because we use that information for when we're sizing our battery bank and solar. Another thing to consider is peak power or your surge. Water pumps, even sometimes fridges and air conditioners, they'll have two ratings. They'll have a maximum input current, which is the surge, and then they'll have a continuous rating. So we use the continuous rating for sizing the batteries in solar, but we use the surge ratings to work out what size inverter we need. Water pumps will probably be the largest surge in a tiny home, and pumps can surge anywhere from 3 to 8 times their continuous power rating. So a 450 watt pump could actually surge to 3,600 watts, which is pretty big. But these surges only last for a very short period of time. So when you do your list, your appliance list, if you got the figures, just note them down. Proper off-grid inverters will have a surge rating twice of their continuous rating. So take, for example, Victron 4 kilowatt inverter will actually surge to 8 kilowatts for a couple of seconds. Different brands use different ratings. So just go through that with your designer, or you'll just have to look up the data sheet for the inverter. After that, it's just as simple as adding up the numbers. And then once you've got your average daily usage, we can then work out your solar array, inverter, and battery bank sizes. Now, you mentioned sunlight hours. We use peak sun hours when we size our solar array. So a peak sun hour is basically the best hours of the day with the most solar irradiance, or the hours that will produce the best solar power. So you'll still get production either side of these peak sun hours, but we specifically use the peak sun hours for sizing the solar array. And the peak sun hours will vary from winter to summer, and also from location to location. So, for example, Coffs Harbour, during winter, they have about 3 peak sun hours, and in summer, they have just over 6. Cairns has about 4 in winter and 6.5 in summer. And Hobart has 1.3 in winter and just over 6 in summer. So that's a big difference. When we size the solar, we will use the worst month of the year. So it's like counting calories. Basically, calories in, calories out, same as solar in, power out. So we need to ensure that during the worst month of the year, there will be enough solar to cover the house loads, charge the batteries up, and try and keep the generator off. Assuming that there's good sun, there's always going to be times where the generator will be needed, extended periods of rain or holiday period. If you get family around, we need to account for that. So peak sun hours can be found on the Bureau of Meteorology. So just go to bom.gov.au. On the homepage, go down to the bottom and look for climate data online. There's a link, and then that'll take you to another page, and then you can just go through the form and fill it out. But we can link a video on where to find it, how to work it out. Other factors would be weather, panel tilts, and orientations. So with weather, you might live in a town like Babinda in far north Queensland that has really good sun hours, but it also rains a lot during summer. So we need to allow for that. Same thing, you might live in a place where during winter you might have, typical long periods of overcast weather. So we need to allow for that as well. Panel tilts and orientations. So north-facing panels is best for production throughout the day. If you can't do north, east and west is good. East will give you a boost in the morning. West will give you a boost in the afternoon. And failing that, if you can't do it, south is good. South's fine. You just compensate with more solar. Panel tilts. Ideally, you're trying to go a little bit higher than your latitude. You can tilt panels. You can get tilt racking if you need, if you've got a flat roof. But usually just flat to the roof is okay. We can compensate with adding a couple more panels if we need. Tilt racking does add a cost to your overall price, and also it doesn't really look the best. So take that into consideration. And then after that, it's just a matter of doing the maths, working out what size solar batteries, inverters you need.
Yeah, fantastic. So what I'm hearing you say is, because I know that online often, and just sometimes speaking to different people and being in like different tiny house Facebook groups, there's questions like, what's everyone doing for solar and what kind of setup do you have? But really it seems to be that you've got to ask the question, well, what is it that you actually need yourself and your family, and what requirements do you have? And so working out all of that so that then you guys can help design and customize that specifically for the person rather than, I mean, it's good to know what other people are doing, but really it comes down to what your needs are and what your, the way that you're living in your everyday life as well, and what kind of appliances you have. So that's really good to know. And I know there's a little bit of, can be a little bit technical, all this solar system off-grid speak, and especially for someone that might be new to a lot of this or hasn't experienced or doesn't really know too much about it. Are you able to let us know, give us maybe a basic understanding about the different types of equipment that can go into an off-the-grid solar setup? So, things like solar panels, and then you also mentioned batteries and inverters and charge controllers and all those types of things, generators too, just like basic understanding.
Yeah, so it all starts with the solar panels. Then it goes down. There's different ways to do it. In the tiny homes, we normally use a charge controller, solar charge controller. You might have heard the term MPPT, which stands for maximum power point tracker or tracking. So that's basically a DC to DC conversion from the voltage of the solar panels down to whatever your battery needs, whether it be 12, 24, 48 volt. That's a direct connection. So that's the most efficient charging source or form. Then you'll have an inverter, different inverters. You see the little tiny ones with the plugs on the front that connect straight on the batteries. We use a product which has a built-in charger as well. And when I say charger, I mean for generator charging. So it's an inverter charger, and then it basically looks after the system, and then it works with the solar charge controller to make sure the batteries are charged up. And then the batteries would be the next biggest thing. And then probably the biggest consideration for batteries is space and weight. Back in the day, we'd use a lot of lead acid batteries. They're a good economical option, but they do take up a lot of room, and they do have specific requirements such as ventilation and stuff like that. So the most common or popular option these days is lithium, and there's lots of different brands, different sizes, different voltages. You don't really need to do too much in-depth investigation into that sort of stuff, because your solar installer will go through all ins and outs of each type. And you also need to make sure that you can't just buy a lithium battery off the shelf and just expect it to work. There's a lot more to a lithium battery. Usually there's built-in battery management units or battery management systems, and that they take care of all the individual cells inside of the battery. I've seen lots of people build their own lithium batteries. It does come with a bit of risk, because your BMS is quite important to make sure that your batteries don't catch fire or get damaged from overcharging or undercharging or over temp or anything like that. So that would be the main components of the system. And then extra options would be, do you want system monitoring? If you're going to have internet, do you want online monitoring? Generators are a big one as well. Do you get just a little Honda 2 kVA generator, or do you need something a bit bigger? Generally, for the tiny homes, the Honda little 2 kVA Hondas or Yamahas are a good option. You can plug in and charge up the batteries just for a bit of backup. In the tiny homes, you're a bit restricted for space, so you might have to compromise with the number of panels and the number of batteries you can actually fit in there. So that's where your generator will become more of an integral part of the system, because you're going to be relying on that. If you've got a week of rain, how are you going to charge your batteries? Are you going to be using a generator? You want to make sure it's a good quality generator and it's going to be big enough to charge your batteries. One of the big things with generators is the generator, when it connects into the inverter charger, it's going to take care of the loads. So you want to make sure that the generator is big enough to be able to power those loads, as well as some extra to charge your batteries up during those times of rainy weather or, overcast or whatever.
Yeah. So with the batteries, then I know that it might be dependent on the context, but in a general sense, like, what would be the minimum amount of days that someone might want to have battery storage of power for? I mean, I know, like, maybe depends on the location and all that too, but generally
we try and aim for 2 days of backup. back in the day of the lead acid batteries, we'd aim for 3 to 5 days for homes. Tiny houses, if you could get it a day and a half, if you got a generator, a day to day and a half will be fine. The main thing, I guess, is for me is that I try and make sure that the customer is aware that this battery bank, I recommend this size battery bank, but we can only fit this battery bank. So there are going to be more times throughout the year when you might need that generator than other times.
And just to confirm understanding, I suppose, especially if like all of this is new for someone, it's so like the solar panels work, the sun hits the solar panels and then the panels produce DC power. And then the purpose of the inverter is to convert DC into AC, and, all our appliances are generally in AC. So that's what we need the inverter for. And then is it that the charge controller is to charge batteries as well? And then the generator is the backup power source during winter and times where there's not as much power generated. Does that sound correct?
Yeah, that's right. So the charge controller, majority of them will turn on as soon as the sun hits the panels. So they're going to be just charging all the time. In the systems that we use, they get integrated into we do a full system monitoring package with our system so that the inverter will actually talk to the solar charge controller so that they can, they know what each other's doing. And then if the generator's running, the inverter knows that it's getting so many kilowatts from the generator, and it's also got the charge controller putting in a little bit of power. So even on a rainy day, you're still going to get a little bit out of your panels.
Okay, great. That's good to know. And, with tiny houses, some tiny houses tend to have their solar panels on their roof. And then there are other options where I've seen you can have a solar trailer, or sometimes people have like a rack with solar panels on them. And there's other different options like that. I'm wondering, just from your experience, what are some of the considerations for choosing, those different options, having it on your roof or having it separate to the home and things like that?
Well, if there's a roof space there, then roof's always the best option. Sometimes you might have a tiny home that's got skylights, or, if you're in an area where it's a bit cool, you might have a internal fireplace or something, so you might have a little chimney or something like that, or other things, satellite dish or TV antenna. So roof space might be a bit limited. You can do ground mount systems. I haven't seen the solar trailers as such, but it's definitely a good idea. You could do that. It really comes down to working out what size system that you need, and then working out if you only need, say, 4 or 6 panels, there's no point putting in a ground mount with 30 or 40 panels. Ground mount systems can be quite expensive. If the customer owns the land and they're putting in a shed anyway, so they wanted to have a workshop next to the tiny home, then that's a really good option as well, because that gives the customer a usable space. So we can use the roof. You can even put the whole system inside that and then provide power to the tiny home so that everything's put in the house, and then you don't have that space restrictions as what you would if you're trying to fit it inside the home.
Yeah. And I guess also it would be a matter of the location that you're parking the tiny home and wanting to have it so that the panels on the roof in the sun, so that you can generate that power through the sun.
If it's not going to be moved for a while, then the shed or ground mount's probably a good idea. If the home's going to be moved around, then the trailer. Same thing with the trailer. You could use that to house extra batteries, the batteries or the generator and the panels, and then just plug in the house to it.
You mentioned earlier talking about sunlight hours and building the system around like the peak sun hours for your area. Even though like most of our listeners are in Australia, New Zealand as well, but there's also, people around the world in different climates and locations. So I'm wondering if someone lives in an area that doesn't have a lot of sun throughout the year, like what are some of those considerations? Obviously, it maybe a generator would be something that they would probably get more use out of. And like what other things can you say about that?
Well, we'd probably look at oversizing the solar even more in those situations. So if it's a situation where the location has a lot of trees, obviously there's going to be some sort of compromise where you're going to need to trim some trees or might even need to remove some, which ideally you try not to do. But if you need to for sun, then you might have to. If it's areas where, like down in Tasmania, New Zealand, where you might only have 2 or less peak sun hours, then yeah, oversizing the solar is really the only way to do that. With your solar panels too, especially if you do a ground mount or a trailer system, you can tilt them more. So if you're down Tasmania, instead of having like a 20-degree tilt like what we would up here, you might have like a 40-degree tilt towards the sun, which will help with your production throughout the day.
Okay, great. And, we talked before about energy independence when it comes to off-the-grid solar energy. I'm wondering if you can share a little bit more about just other types of benefits for going off the grid with solar for your tiny house.
Yeah, energy independence is a really good one. A lot of people like that feeling of not being reliant on someone or something else for their power. It does cost a bit more than a normal grid-connected system, but you don't have that monthly bill to look forward to or quarterly bill. That's probably the biggest benefit. Power outages, a lot of rural areas will be on like a return line or might have a lot of trees and lines get damaged during storms. So you might have off-grid is the best option for those sort of areas. Gives you that peace of mind that you're always going to have power. Your fridge is going to be on, your light's going to be on. That's pretty important. There's the lights in the fridge, because once you don't have those on, it gets a bit stressful.
Yeah. And even though investing in a good solar system can cost a fair bit of money up front, what about potential long-term savings on that, especially as if you are off the grid and you're generating your own energy from the sun, then you're not having the bills for being on the grid? Like, can you say anything more about that and what the potential for that is?
Yeah, so getting it right the first time is probably a big thing. I've had a lot of customers that have opted for cheap equipment and it's come back. It's come back to bite them, and they've ended up having to pay twice. The biggest thing is get an installer that knows what they're talking about. Go do a proper energy audit so that you can make sure that your system's sized to what you need. We always build in a bit of a fudge factor anyway, so because people's usage will grow, family might grow, things like that. So there's always a bit more that you build in, and then quality components. Get as best as what you can afford at the time. If you can get high-end stuff at the start, then that's good, because then that just lengthens the amount of time before you have to spend money again. So they're the main things. Make sure the system's sized correctly. You don't want an undersized system. You also don't want an oversized system, because you end up paying more money than what you should have. And then quality components. And then probably thirdly is make sure that the installation is done properly as well. There's no point spending big bucks on top quality equipment if the installation's done poorly, because then you're just going to have dramas anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like you get what you pay for, right? What about, do you have any examples of how much you can potentially save on an electricity bill when you've got a solar system installed, an off-the-grid solar system installed?
With off-grid, you're sort of paying for your power up front in a way. So instead of paying $300 or $500 a quarter, you're sort of paying for all of that up the front. So that's like going back to the last question, that's where good quality equipment will pay for themselves over the long run, because you're not having to replace equipment. So instead of spending $1,000 on an inverter, you get a good brand for $2,500, $3,000. That inverter comes with a 5-year warranty, but it's probably going to last 10 years instead of the cheap one that might last 1 or 2 years. So it's sort of just, you do pay for a bit more up front for off-grid, because you've got the batteries as well, which you have to take into account. But yeah, it's sort of paying for your power up front instead of that monthly bill. And then also with your, probably the biggest saving is if you are rural, which most tiny homes probably are rural, and you've got a distance from your site to the grid. Some sites we've had where, they've had quotes for $300,000 or $400,000 just to get power running. So that's sort of a no-brainer. And the other thing too is you don't want to have a 100-acre property and then have your tiny home right next to the fence where the power pole is either. You might want to be up on a hillside or something like that. So that's where it's more cost effective for off-grid and batteries. Anything over probably, if you've got to run more than 20, 30 meters, then it's seriously look at getting off-grid instead of getting connected to the grid.
Great. And we'd love to know a bit more about the different options for off-grid systems that SAE Group offers and also the different ranges of costs involved.
Off-grid's a really customizable thing. We really take the time to do our energy audits properly so we can make sure that the system is what the customer needs. We don't really do the cookie cutter systems, and I'd probably advise not going for the cookie cutter system as well. Those are the systems where you see online a package deal with this amount of panels, this size inverter, this size battery. Chances are they're not going to be the right fit and you'll probably spend too much money anyway. Ballpark figure, tiny home systems would probably be anywhere between 10 and 15,000. A three-bed home with 4 people would probably be in the 20s, early 20s. And then, if you've got a big house, big shed, I've done some systems in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it's really probably the best thing is to just make sure that the system's sized to what the customer needs.
Yeah, perfect. And with your systems, can that be installed by, just any kind of electrician in someone's area that should be able to do that?
We try and install all our own systems. So we service Queensland up to sort of like Bundaberg area and probably 2-3 hours inland, and then all the way down to Port Macquarie, same thing, 2 or 3 hours inland. The systems can be installed by any electrician. Any electrical work should be done by a licensed electrician. The problems I've had in the past is where an electrician who's had really no idea with off-grid or batteries has tried to install systems and it hasn't ended well. So yes, you can get any electrician to do it, but it would be advised to have some sort of knowledge of off-grid systems in the first place.
Mm-hmm. And, you mentioned before about making sure that the system from the start is quality and that it is installed properly. I'm wondering for people that are maybe not in the outside of the areas that you guys service, if they're looking for a good quality off-the-grid solar system and, they're not really sure where to start, apart from making sure that it is quality and that it will be installed properly, what are some other important things they can consider or ask about when they're going through that process?
In the solar industry, there's an organisation called the Clean Energy Council. All solar installers need to be certified by them. So what people can do is actually go onto the Clean Energy Council website and then they can find an installer. That would be the first way to look into it. The second would be check out their website, see if they've got a gallery, see if they've got, if they're on social media, see if they're posting pictures about what they do, and talk to them. Pick up the phone, give them a call, or talk to the installer directly. And you'll get a gauge for if they know what they're talking about or if they're just telling you what you want to hear. A lot of the time, if they're asking you a lot of questions about what you want and what you need, then that's a really good start as well. And then also if they're listening to what you're saying to them as well, and make sure that you're comfortable with the person, and then it's just really due diligence. Just check reviews, things like that. You see if anyone else has used the companies before, and then have a look at the products that they use. If they're using good quality equipment, then there's a good chance that they know what they're doing.
Great. Thank you for that. And, we've been talking mostly about off the grid solar here, but I know that you guys also do grid connected solar. So love to know just a little bit more about grid connected solar for tiny homes.
Yeah, so we do lots of grid connect solar. Tiny homes, same thing. It'd be you're not really restricted to design as what you are with off-grid because it's basically panels and inverter. So the biggest consideration will be roof space again. You need to have the roof space for the panels. And also, there's not a lot of price difference between, say, a 3 kilowatt system and a 5 kilowatt system. So if you can go the bigger system, go the bigger system. But again, that will come back to roof space. And then you might need to look, if you don't have that roof space, then you might need to look into a ground mount system. Or a shed, even if there's a shed going in. Again, that's a really good option as well.
Now, if someone wants to work with you guys at SAE Group, I'm wondering if you're able to just share a bit more about like what's the process like. So I know that you talked about doing an energy audit and making sure that you go through what people actually need so you can customize a system. But yeah, what does that process look like?
So the process would be just give us a call, have a chat, ask for me. We can go through your energy needs, and then what we do is we'll do an on-site. So if you're local to me in the southeast Queensland, I'll come out to site and meet you, and just it helps me get a better feel of what you're going to need. If you're in northern New South Wales down to Coffs Harbour, Port Macquarie, then we've got solar guys down there, in-house solar guys that will come out, same thing. And basically it just starts with a conversation. What do you want to do? What are you thinking of doing in the future? Do you want to expand? Are you going to be here for a while? Looking at their appliances, what they've got, water pumps, everything, hot water, just check it out. If it's a new build, then we do it off the plan. We've had customers that haven't even built the house yet, so we just send us a plan and we'll base it on that. And then it's just a lot of questions. I think I love questions. I love it when customers ask me lots of questions because it means that we can really refine what system is going to suit them the best. And yeah, that's probably it. It's the conversation, really. It's getting to know the person, finding out what they need and what they want.
That's perfect. And I love that because I know just from speaking to a lot of different people that not every company that offers solar is offering, I suppose, a service specifically for tiny homes. I think some of them don't want to necessarily touch it or just aren't really sure or whatever. So that's really cool that you guys are able to, to help people in this space because, especially with all that's happened in the last couple of years and people looking more towards self-sufficiency and the tiny house lifestyle, I think that it's going to definitely see like a lot more people wanting to go off grid with solar more than before. Actually, just as you were talking there, I had another question pop up because we talked about earlier the different appliances, fridges and chargers and all of that. What about hot water? Because that can use quite a lot of power. Do you see with people that you've helped with tiny homes going off grid for solar that they're sometimes using gas, or would people also be generating it through solar for hot water?
It would depend on roof space as well. A lot of people, probably more so in the tiny homes, is probably more gas. Really, the gas units don't take up a lot of room. You can use electric, and we've done a lot of houses with electric hot water. We just factor it in as any other appliance. So that comes back to that initial conversation. I ask, what's your cooking, gas or electric? What's your hot water, gas or electric or fire or wood? Some places can use a combustion stove for heating and cooking. So it really just depends on that. Probably not so much solar hot water in the tiny homes, again, because of the available roof spaces. But that it might be a good option. Probably not for people all the way down south, but if you get good sun and you've got a nice north-facing roof, then that's definitely an option. With gas, it still costs money, so it's just be a matter of, do you invest in the gas equipment and then have a gas bottle, or do you put that extra money and make the system a bit bigger? So it's all considerations that you do at the start, especially if it's a new build. That's a good conversation to have at the beginning before stuff starts getting bought, appliances start getting bought and installed. But we can make a system to suit anything. So you're not limited. You have to have gas because it's a tiny home. No, we can do electric, but it just means that you might need more panels and you might need more batteries.
Yeah, cool. I thought I'd better ask that because I know that hot water can take up like a lot more power, and that, some people are using gas in tiny home. I think it actually is quite a common option for off-grid, but I guess it depends if you're wanting to use the power that you're generating yourself from the sun and then investing a little bit more in a bigger system, as you say, or just going the route of the gas. So yeah, that's cool to know. And I'm just wondering as well, Matt, so as we start to wrap up the conversation today, is there anything else that you feel we haven't mentioned about off-the-grid solar as it relates to tiny homes, or even grid-connected solar, that people might benefit from hearing?
I think we've probably covered all of it. I think the biggest thing is start with the conversation, work out what you need at the start. So, especially for tiny homes when space might be a bit more restricted than a full-size house, just go through and find out what you can live without, and that will make it a lot easier. Once you start designing a solar system, the smaller the system, obviously, it's going to be less cost involved. Grid connect, not really too much, because you're feeding it back to the grid.
Mm-hmm.
If you can go bigger. You'll get a little bit back from the feed-in tariffs anyway. Have a good think about what you need and what you want first, and then it's all downhill from there.
Yeah, awesome. And with the tariffs that you were just talking about, I don't know if there's a brief explanation for it, but you're able to share a little bit more about how that works?
Yeah, so it's feed-in tariff, and it's provided by your energy retailer, and it's however many cents per kilowatt hour that you send back to the grid. So once your house loads have been satisfied during the day, whatever solar's left over will get sent back into the grid, and then your energy retailer will pay you for that. It's not a lot at the moment. I think some places in Queensland are at 5 cents. I think New South Wales isn't much better. So it's a little bit, but it does help. And sometimes, if you've got an energy retailer you've been with for a while, they might offer you a bit better feed-in tariff. So if you've got a 6 kilowatt system in summer, you should produce around round figures 30 kilowatt hours a day. So if your daytime usage, it doesn't help for nighttime, obviously, because the sun's not shining at nighttime. But if you use 10 kilowatt hours during the day, that means 20 goes back to the grid, and then your energy retailer will give you a little bit for that power that gets sent back.
Is there anything that, for either yourself or for SAE Group, are there any exciting projects or initiatives coming up for you guys?
We're quoting all the time. We've got some larger homes coming up, off-grid homes, which will be quite large actually. We're always in the commercial grid connect space. Again, we've got some large projects coming up as well. So it's always changing and evolving day to day. Stay tuned.
Beautiful. And I mean, SAE stands for solar, aircon, and electrical too. So you guys have got a lot of other services that people might be interested as well. Yeah. Yeah.
So we started out with electrical first, and we've really specialised in solar in the last probably 12 years has been our main point. But yeah, we can offer electrical work. We have another company which specialises in underground power, overhead power. So we've had situations where, we've had putting in a solar system and the customer needed underground power, so we can do both. And then solar is our main focus of the company. We just love it. It's our main thing.
And where can people find and connect with you guys online?
So we're Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Just type in SAE Group and we should come up. Website's saegroup.com.au, and you can get us on the phone 1300 18 20 50.
Perfect. I will put everything in the show notes and also other links that we discussed in the show today. And if you want to find the show notes, you can go to tinyhouseconversations.com. And, Matt, thank you so much for taking the time out of your workday today and for sharing all about off-the-grid solar systems for tiny houses. I really appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. And if you're listening to this episode, thank you for taking the time out of your day to be here with us as well. If you want more Tiny House Conversations, stay tuned for new episodes every Thursday, and I'll see you next time. Thanks again for listening. And if you enjoyed the conversation today, you found it valuable, and you want to support the podcast, the best way you can do that is to share the love. That way I can keep bringing you more tiny house conversations to help you on your own tiny journey. So here are 3 ways that you can support the podcast. Number 1, if you have a friend or family member that you feel would benefit from hearing these conversations, feel free to share it with them, email them, text them, send them a telegram, do whatever you need to do to share it with them. Number 2, if you hit the subscribe button, you'll know exactly when the next episode is live. And number 3, if you head on over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening to podcasts and leave a 5-star rating and review. Thank you so much in advance. I appreciate you, and I'll see you in the next episode.